Back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to get into more of the NFL rule changes that have been solidified a bit more over this past week with the NFL owners meeting coming up, I think just next week, next Friday, if I'm not mistaken. They're going to talk about a whole bunch of topics and potential rule changes that teams can propose and some of the bigger ones that they're going to vote on as well. Before, a few weeks ago, when I first started this show, I talked about some of the rule changes and some some wild proposals that teams suggested. But now that all these have sort of been worked through, they've thought about them, they've thought of consequences, and they've thought of how they want this verbiage to come out to all the players. Now we have the official proposals that these teams will vote on at the NFL owners meeting. And as a reminder, they need 24 out of the 32 owners to vote on one favor to either pass or decline the proposal of this rule change. And there are some pretty big ones in here. I will start with probably the biggest one, the hip drop tackle, that has become a bit of the major talking point recently among all the players that have taken to social media to voice their disagreement with this. And, the NFL, I think, has made this the biggest one that they want to talk about, at least because of all the injuries that you see because of a hip drop tackle. And you just think back to Mark Andrews, I think Tony Pollard as well. Maybe not this season, but before that. Just two of the biggest players on two of the biggest teams now being hindered because of these sort of tackles. And the way the NFL sort of broke this down, this was all according to Jonathan Jones from CBS Sports, their NFL insider, and how he broke it down on an article I read, just how the NFL is viewing it. Initially, they're proposing that if they do deem a tackle a hip drop tackle, it will be enforced as a 15-yard penalty, so I would assume as an unnecessary roughness penalty, and it would also result in an automatic first down. Two pretty big things there, obviously. If that was to be the penalty for this, it just shows you how much the NFL is really valuing this sort of tackle. They almost want to completely get rid of it and not even see it performed out there. Same thing with face masks and horse collars, but I think those are more obvious to tell. And with the hip drop tackle, you can see how they want to get rid of it, but now getting into the definition and how really tricky this could get, the NFL provided a potential definition for this, and it is when a player grabs the runner with both hands or wraps the runner with both arms and unweights himself, swiveling and dropping his hips and or lower body, landing and trapping the runner's legs at or below the knee. So that's the specifics on the rule. That's what a player would have to do to deem this a hip drop tackle. And it seems pretty clear, right, with all the words and how specific they want to make it with their hands and their arms and unweighting themselves. Some of these words are kind of weird, honestly, because it's a lot easier said than seeing it play out. Trying to prevent a player from unweighing himself and swiveling his hips out and just being dead weight on another player trying to bring the runner down. That all is very specific, and you really have to think about doing that and trying to fit this into the rules. You're really making a defender overthink a tackle that has been so routine for them since they were, in Pee Wee football and since they first started playing football. The goal is tackle the ball runner any way you can. Obviously keeping it clean, not going to take him out, right? But wrapping him up and then just bringing him down. It all becomes more instinctive. Players play better through instinct and not even thinking, just doing it all, reacting to it. I think now, with all these rule changes, I know they're trying to make it safer and for players to actually play, have all the stars out there. They're making it really, really a thinking game and thinking of how to tackle a guy. Am I supposed to do it this way? Am I supposed to not put this much weight on him? How much are they going to consider this a hip drop tackle? All of these things, I think, just starts to hinder the game a little bit. And with this definition being so specific, when they replay it, for example, or if people see it, it just becomes more of a talking point that takes away from the game, which is one of the biggest points I wanted to make. With all of these penalties that could affect the game, if it's a hip drop there, I could see this potentially happening at least 2 to 3 times a game, and then that really affects how a defense performs. Now they're being hindered, they get a great stop, but then they throw the flag, and it all gets wiped away because they considered it a hip drop tackle. And then the next day, you have more people talking about how this one play, how a bad decision or a right decision affected the game, rather than focusing on great plays that were made, great defensive stops, a great offensive play, great scheme and stuff like that. Going this route, trying to make it more safe, too much, I think will take away from the game and take away people's attention from talking about the actual game of football, and it'll all go into talking about, penalties and how this could have affected the game this way, this could have affected it the other way. It's kind of weird right now. The NFLPA has voiced their displeasure about it. I mentioned Cam Jordan and Darius Slay were among some of the players that took to social media and didn't like it. And the NFLPA were really worried about the potential subjectivity of this call, how one ref could see it, another one can't see it. Those sort of things, I think that'll be the biggest thing that I don't think it'll get passed, but that'll be the biggest thing that is brought to the table, how subjective this is. There's already a lot of penalties against the defense, so on adding this on top of it, how are they really going to tackle someone if they're overthinking it, and then by overthinking it, they might do something else wrong, not consider the other consequences of all the other penalties that go against the defense. So that's where that stands. The hip drop tackle, I get it, it is dangerous, but you can only do so much to prevent a player from not hurting someone without changing the game completely. This is football at the end of the day. It's dangerous. People will get hurt. I think they're trying to avoid anybody getting hurt, and that's just almost impossible in a game like this. But again, that's what the NFL is trending now towards, trying to be more safe, but they could be overdoing it a little bit, in my opinion, with the hip drop tackle. Then, in my opinion, my favorite one that could change, and I hope that it does go this way, is the whole breakdown and setup of the kickoffs. Trying to change it, make it more exciting, because last year, with the fair catch rule that was added to last season just to try it out, you could fair catch it anywhere, and then basically everybody did that, and there was no more real kickoffs. It would all went through the back of the end zone anyway for touchbacks, so there was that, and if they did field it, people didn't think it was worth running it back and losing some yards potentially, so they didn't do it. And that takes away from the game, the excitement. Probably one of the more exciting things is seeing a guy just break through that sea of bodies and get into just plains of open grass and scoring. That changes the momentum. That's a huge thing. And what the NFL has proposed that they were going to be voting on is that one thing that the kicking team could do is not moving until the ball is kicked or fielded in the landing zone, which they've designated to be the receiving team's 20-yard line to the goal line. So that area, that 20-yard area of the receiving team, that's the landing spot. So the kicking team's not allowed to move until it either lands there or the ball is kicked. I'm sure they're going to decide on that more at the meeting. And other than that, the teams are only allowed 2 returners in that zone, so they can't call for a fair catch also in that zone. If the ball lands in there or if the player fields it in there, they have to return it. There's no more fair catching it. They tried it out last year. It didn't work out the way they wanted it to, so they got rid of it. And if the ball does land in there, the 2 returners, either one of them has to return it in that case. And on top of that, other scenarios that could happen is if the ball doesn't reach the zone, it goes out of bounds, or it just stops before going into the landing zone. The ball would end up at the 40-yard line, and that's where the drive would start. Or if the ball is kicked into the end zone and down in the end zone, or as a touchback, the ball would go to the 35-yard line. And another scenario that could happen is if it lands in the zone and rolls into the end zone. So if it lands in the landing zone and then just ends up in the end zone after that, and the returner's down in the end zone, the ball would just start at the 20-yard line. And onside kicks also fall under this category, I guess, as well, because it's not too big of a deal anyway. They couldn't figure out another scenario to make it more exciting, so they've just put it under the same category with the kickoffs. And the only real difference with this that they've tried to do is that the team that's trying to kick an onside kick has to let the receiving team know that they're gonna attempt one, and they can only do it in the fourth quarter if they're losing. So it all falls under this kickoff resetting sort of umbrella, and I hope that really does happen, because the way it was all set up with the landing zone, not letting the kicking team move until the ball is kicked or somebody fields it, I think will make it more exciting, probably more safe, because it actually gives the receiving team a chance now to actually run and try to get some positive yards and get the fans seeing some exciting plays. So I think that's great. And starting the ball from the 40, if it's basically, they haven't really changed that, honestly, if you think about it. If it doesn't reach the zone or if it's kicked out of bounds, it ends up, I think, on the 40 anyway. So that one's pretty much the same. The 35-yard line is the only one that's really different. If the ball is kicked past the end zone as a touchback, or it's downed in the end zone directly, it will go to the 35. So again, pushing for more offense, seeing more of that is always good and always on the NFL's mind. And another one that went into more detail would be a scenario where a quarterback throws a pass, and if he was down or if he was out of bounds and the refs got it wrong and they said that he wasn't out of bounds and they counted the pass as legal, they said he wasn't down or out of bounds, they can review that. And what they're trying to change is, if the quarterback, say, was ruled down or he was out of bounds, but he actually wasn't, he completed the throw in time before he was down or out of bounds, that actually can't be reviewed. You can review it one way. If the refs said that he threw it and it did count, they can review their mistake. But if he actually wasn't down and everybody sees that he wasn't down, but they called it down, originally they couldn't review that, but now that's being looked at as a play that can be reviewed. Honestly, I don't know why it wouldn't be reviewed either way, because it is basically the same thing. But apparently you couldn't review it, so that's another thing. And the last thing I will say will be something that seems obvious, but they are going to vote on it, is using the replay review to see if a game clock expired before the snap. And I say the game clock, not the play clock, because I think it was a time last year where I think it was the Packers and the Lions were playing, and the game clock expired to end the third quarter, and the play went on. They counted the play as fair, that it happened before it expired, and it hindered the Lions, I think, in that game. They were clearly upset a lot by it, but they couldn't go back and review that. Almost like the NBA, when you see a last-second shot go up, they review it to see if it was before the buzzer or not. I don't know why they haven't done that in the NFL, but now they're trying to incorporate that so situations like that don't happen and don't affect the game as much. Those could be easily avoided, and that's one I think that should pass. Like I mentioned, it is kind of like the NBA. These plays matter with the game clock, and I want to stress again, it is just the game clock, not the play clock, because it gets too complicated with that. Saying a guy hiked it or snapped it before the play clock, I think, would make too much of an issue where there shouldn't be one. So those are the biggest ones that were really talked about the most: the kickoff, the hip drop tackle, and the quarterbacks throwing it, replay review being incorporated more into the gameplay and into the NFL. I would love to know what you guys think about the potential rule changes, if you really hate them, if you really love them, or if you want to comment on other rule changes that you would love to see in the NFL. that would also be great. But in saying that, I will send it to another break now. And on the other side of that, I will bring you my best free agent fits for some of the best free agents left on the market. And stick around towards the end as well, where I'm going to talk about Caleb Williams and his pro day. You're not going to want to miss all of that, because stick around, and all of that is coming up next.